Hello. Adab. Welcome to the session on human science investigation. Uh, my name is I am an associate professor comparative. Uh, so obviously the two sets of terms here are somewhat unfamiliar in the general discourse. Uh, the first one, obviously, more unfamiliar one is perhaps the Anthropocene. I'm talking about a general audience, a lot of discussion in academic circles, but still in the general discourse, the Anthropocene might why human science that aspect is about. Um, so the Anthropocene is not a historical time, geological. When we say we talk about historical time period, we talk about actually really work on say a couple of decades, a couple of centuries, really ambitious, a couple of millennia, yeah. But when we talk about the Anthropocene, we are talking about millions of years, yeah, millions of years, billions of years. So the last geological time period was the Holocene, yeah, which was the respite uh, that we have in this very long period of the Earth's history, in which what we moderns call human civilization came into existence, which is the past 12,000 years. Yeah, everything that we know to be human civilization, that is the historical time period, is this time period, the Holocene, which is a particular geological age which allowed for the climatic conditions uh, in which what we moderns call human civilization could come into existence. Yeah? Large urban-based societies, yeah? Agricultural and urban societies, the two emerge together. Now we, as a result of the quote unquote progress that we've made in the past couple of hundred years, especially, yeah, we have entered into, especially actually after World War II, this period in which most of us actually came into existence. So we were born into the Anthropocene, yeah, because the entire modern world system dramatically accelerated in this post World War II time period. Yeah, there's a dramatic acceleration, and of course, the acceleration means that it keeps becoming faster and faster. Yeah. So the past few decades, once again, have been even faster, and the past decade has been even faster. We have experienced this. All of us have experienced this. The past decade has been remarkable in terms of um, these climatic developments. Yeah, catastrophic climatic developments. And this is a result we know only crazy people think that it is not a result of human activities. Yeah. Um, a very particular kind of human, and my colleagues will speak about that, so I won't go into it any further. This demands a complete reorientation of what large parts or significant parts, because it is really the elites and then the middle classes who have the footprint for us to hold them responsible for what is happening and who need to change, yeah, because a large number of people, the poor people, they hardly have any ecological footprint, so they should not be included in whatever we are calling the human, yeah, in the Anthropocene. Anthropo means human. The geological period brought about as a result of human activity. So, with that, the conditions have been totally transformed. Yeah, we need a total reorientation. People like us, we need to think about a total reorientation, and of course, this is primarily the responsibility in the way our societies are organized, responsibility of people who work in the academy, yeah, in academic institutions, higher educational institutions. This is first of all our responsibility to reimagine. Now, none of us will be able to do the work that needs to be done, but what steps can we take in that direction? So with that, I ask my very honorable colleague, Professor Shama Dosa, who is an associate professor in social development and policy, to enlighten us further on what steps we can take in education in this direction, and not just beyond education as well, since she is also a well-known practitioner. Professor Shama Dosa.
आदाब, जैसे नुमान साहब ने बताया कि हम जब बात करते हैं एंथ्रोपोसीन की, तो ये एक अंग्रेज़ी यानी कि लफ्ज़ है जो हम कहते हैं कि ये जो इंसान और जो एनवायरनमेंट है उसका जो मिलाप है उसके बारे में बातचीत, हम इसके बारे में सोचते हैं, लेकिन उसके भी ऊपर भी काफ़ी तनकीद है इस टर्म पे एंथ्रोपोसीन में, जिसके अंदर हम कहते हैं कि एंथ्रोपोसीन या टू बी ह्यूमन का क्या मतलब है। और उसमें सवाल जवाब ये होता है कि सारे इंसान एक जैसे होते हैं, उनका जो है इन्फ्लुएंस एनवायरनमेंट पे एक ही जैसा होता है, क्या कुछ लोग ऐसे हैं जिनको ज़्यादा तफरीक की बात करते हैं कि जिस पे ज़्यादा असर होता है, कम असर होता है, असर करने वाले जो हैं या सिस्टम्स बनाने वाले लोग जो हैं, जो ताकतवर हैं, उनका क्या उसके बारे में सोच है कि वो जो है हमारे जो माहौल पे किस तरह का असर हावी करते हैं। इसके बारे में हमें ज़रा सोचने की ज़रूरत है। और जो हमारी तालीमी इदारे हैं उसके अंदर हमारा मकसद क्या है, हम क्यों तालीम देते हैं, और ये एंथ्रोपोसीन और तालीम का क्या यानी कि एक दूसरे से ताल्लुक़ क्या है, उसके बारे में थोड़ा सा हम बात करेंगे। तो जो तालीम की जो हम बात करते हैं तो हम सोचते हैं कि तालीम देते क्यों हैं। तालीम जो है वो सिर्फ़ यानी कि लोगों को कोई स्किल सिखाने का मकसद नहीं है। तालीम जो है जब हम देते हैं, जैसे कि हम यूनिवर्सिटी के प्रोफेसर्स हैं, हम क्यों सोच के देते हैं कि तालीम में हमारा शोबा क्यों है। हमारी कोशिश ये होती है कि सिर्फ़ स्किल्स लोगों तक पहुंचाना नहीं, लेकिन एक सोच को या एक नज़रिए को लोगों तक जो है पहुंचाना है कि हम किस तरह सोचते हैं और वो नज़रिया जो है हमारे रोज़मर्रा की ज़िंदगी में क्या असर करता है। तो हम जब तालीम की बात करते हैं तो माहौल के साथ और इंसान का क्या ताल्लुक़ है माहौल के साथ, इसके बारे में बातचीत करते हैं, लेकिन हमें इस तरह हमारी जो सोच है वो ज़रा सा फ़र्क है। हम चाह रहे हैं, ख़ास तौर पे जो हबीब यूनिवर्सिटी का जो हमारा काम है उसके अंदर हम देखना चाह रहे हैं कि जो तफरीक की जो बात है उस पे हम ज़रा सोचते हैं कि तालीम में जो है, जैसे हम बात करते हैं तो उसके अंदर क्लास की बात करते हैं, हम रेस की बात करते हैं, हम फ़िरका वारान जो है तफरीक की बात करते हैं, हम सिन्फ और जिन्स की तफरीक की बात करते हैं। जो हमारा जो ताल्लुक़ है दोनों के साथ उसके बारे में बात कर रहे हैं। तो हमारे जो कोर्सेज़ मिसाल के तौर पे जिस तरह हम इसको किस तरह करते हैं, तालीम में किस तरह लेकर आते हैं, ये एक अहम यानी कि हमारी कोशिश है कि हम तालीम की इदारों में या तालीमी निज़ाम में तब्दील कैसे लेकर आएँ। यानी कि मैं जिस यानी कि सोच से ताल्लुक़ रखती हूँ उसके अंदर हम जो पिदरशाही की बात करते हैं या फेमिनिज़म की हम बात करते हैं, जहाँ हम कहते हैं कि तफरीक जो है वो किस बुनियाद पे, सिंध की बुनियाद पे होती है। तो हम जब पढ़ाते हैं या हम सोचते हैं तो हम तफरीक जो है वो कहाँ से शुरू होती है, طاقت کس پہ حاوی ہے، کس کے پاس نہیں ہے، اس کے بارے میں بات چیت کرتے ہیں. اب وہ تعلیم کی جو ہے کلاسز میں ہم اس کو کس طرح لے کر آتے ہیں. ہماری کوشش یہ ہوتی ہے کہ ہم کرٹیکل تھنکنگ کو کلاس روم میں لے کر آئیں. مثال کے طور پہ ہمارے 2-3 کورسز ہیں، جیسے کہ سوشل ڈیولپمنٹ پالیسی کا کورس میں پڑھا رہی ہوں. اس وقت جو ہے ہم ایک کورس پڑھا رہے ہیں جو ہے کلائمیٹ چینج، جینڈر اور پیس بلڈنگ پہ. تو ہم اسٹوڈنٹس کو یہ کہتے ہیں کہ آپ ذرا سا سوچیں کہ جب آپ تحقیق کرتے ہیں یا تحقیق کے بارے میں سوچتے ہیں تو اس کے اندر کون شامل ہے، کون شامل نہیں ہے. جب ہم کہتے ہیں کہ معلومات یا تعلیم کس کے پاس ہے، نالج کس کے پاس ہے، کس کے پاس نہیں ہے، ہم یہ سوال پوچھتے ہیں کہ کیا آپ جب تنقیدی جو کام کر رہے ہیں اس کے اندر جو لوگ شامل ہوتے ہیں ان کو شمولیتی طریقہ کار سے کس طرح آپ تحقیق میں لا سکتے ہیں. ہم یہ کوشش کر رہے ہیں کہ کسی طرح لوگوں کی جو طریقہ کار ہے سوچنے کے، اس پہ ہم کام کر رہے ہیں. تو ہماری کوشش یہ ہوتی ہے کہ جب ہم تعلیم سے جو ہے یہ سوچ کو یا یہ نظریے کو ہم تحقیق میں لے کر آئیں تو وہ تبدیلی تحقیق ہو، اس سے لوگوں کو فائدہ ہو، اور وہ فائدہ کس قسم کا ہو، جہاں طاقت کے بارے میں ہم بات کر سکیں، اس کا استعمال جو ہے وہ کس طرح ہو رہا ہے، اور اس سے جو معلومات نکل کر آ رہی ہے، جو نالج نکل کر آ رہی ہے، وہ لوگوں تک کس طرح پہنچائے ایک ایکسیسیبل میں بھی. جیسے کہ اگر آپ صرف ایک پرچہ لکھتے ہیں اور لوگ اس کو پڑھتے نہیں ہیں تو اس کا کیا فائدہ. تحقیق کا جو ہے کیا فائدہ ہے جب لوگوں تک اس کی رسائی نہیں ہو. تو ہماری کوشش یہ ہوتی ہے کہ ہاؤ کین یو میک research accessible? How can you talk about power and knowledge in a different way? How can you talk about getting students to do research in a way that is meaningful, that is transformative, that makes a difference in the world that we're living in? So this is the type of work that we're trying to do. And we hope that if you're interested more, we can talk more about the type of courses we teach. But this is the link that we're trying to establish between the Anthropocene and education and how we bring it out in the classroom. This is some of the examples I'd like to share. I hand it over to my colleague. Thank you.
Thank you. And now this is my colleague, Professor Mohammad Haris, who is the director of the Comparative Humanities program at Habib University and is a philosopher. So he'll speak in that vein.
بہت شکریہ. السلام علیکم ایوری ون. بہت خوشی ہو رہی ہے آپ سب لوگوں کو دیکھ کے، اور یہاں پہ کافی اچھی ایک انرجی ہے اس جگہ پر. تو تھینک یو سو مچ فار بینگ ہیئر اینڈ فار دا ٹائم اینڈ اٹینشن. تو اب جیسے اب ڈاکٹر نقوی بتا رہے تھے کہ ہم دونوں کا تعلق ایک پروگرام سے ہے جس کا نام ہے کمپیریٹیو ہیومینٹیز، اور ہماری ایک تو یہ کہ یہ گزارش ہوگی کہ آپ اس پروگرام کا نام اپنی نوٹ بکس میں ضرور آپ لکھ لیں، اور جب آپ کو وقت ملے تو ریڈ مور اباؤٹ دا پروگرام. اور اگر یہاں پر آڈینس میں ایسے لوگ ہیں جو کہ ابھی یونیورسٹی میں ایڈمیشن لینا چاہ رہے ہیں تو یقینی طور پر آپ سوچیں ہمارے پروگرام کو میں آنے کے لیے. اب جو آج جس معاملے پہ بات ہو رہی ہے ہیومن سائنسز ان دی اینتھروپوسین، تو سو ان آر پروگرام دس سورٹ آف problematic, this area is taken very seriously, and we have ongoing courses being taught, like 16-week, 4 credit hour, 3 credit hour university courses. So I am in this semester teaching a course which I have taught several times before at Habib University. It's called Philosophy in the Anthropocene. ٹھیک ہے. تو and then next semester we have another course coming up about the Anthropocene, and that's going to be a history and literature kind of course. تو ایک بات جو میں آپ سے کہنا چاہوں گا کہ Anthropocene hypothesis has made the human sciences and humanities and like social sciences even into a sort of growth industry. یعنی پچھلے 10-12 سال میں there has been an immense proliferation of literature, really immense. And one goal of this literature is to help us understand how we got here, like how we arrive at this moment of the Anthropocene, where the foundations for social life which are in the metabolic exchange, as in the exchange of energy flows that we have with the natural environment. So that foundation is sort of slipping, it's falling apart. And so in the course that I teach, and also some of my other colleagues who are teaching the course, we examine how much time do we have? Says, okay, okay. Say, so within the, like, let's say, field of philosophy, there are various approaches that different thinkers take to understanding, to examining the Anthropocene. So you have thinkers coming from what I would call the Marx world, you know, Marxist thinkers, Marxist philosophers. So they are writing about it. Their big idea is that of metabolic rift. Then you have people coming out of a school known as phenomenology, which has to do with understanding the Anthropocene at the experiential level, right? Then you have people coming out of deconstruction, then various forms of, you know, post-structuralism, so on. You know, like there is a proliferation of literature. However, all of this philosophical literature is genuinely faced with two major challenges. The first challenge, which I'm going to go into in some depth, like in some detail over here, has to do with coming to terms with what we call the indigenous. The indigenous as a not, I mean, as a conceptual category certainly, which is a very slippery, difficult kind of conceptual category, but the indigenous as a reference made to people in the world, and there are many such people in the world who are indigenous, who currently live. So if the overall population of the planet is like, let's say, 6 billion, then you still have around 400 million indigenous people. You know, like that's like a rough estimate, and spread across, all across different parts of the world. In some parts of the world, such as the Latin American countries, like I have a colleague from Brazil, so he knows that there is a becoming indigenous movement, you know, becoming, and like people sort of wanting to become indigenous, especially in the face of the climate catastrophe. And other countries, Colombia is there, Chile is there, Bolivia is there. In our part of the world also, definitely, certainly there are indigenous people, and here we can stick to a very simple kind of definition of the indigenous, that anyone is indigenous who lives on the land. Like their lives are, I mean, all of us live on the land, of course, but to live on the land as in to grow your vegetables, to fish for, you know, like in fresh bodies of water, to be in the land, like not to be in modernized sort of urban spaces such as we have in Karachi. But in Pakistan, since I think sadly, tragically, like our country really is premised, I think like the whole governing framework of this country is premised on a culture of death, not a culture of life. So whatever is indigenous has been systematically eliminated, still being eliminated, but the indigenous sort of thrives. Now, like, you know, now the indigenous presents a sort of challenge to the human sciences, to humanities, to philosophy in a very big way. And one example that I'll give over here, and this is something that you've sort of, you know, like all of you would know, that how many television series being produced these days and running on the channels which you might be following on Netflix or so on are about apocalypse, as in a world before humans, then a world in which humans no longer exist, or a world after humanity kind of scenario. You're familiar with many such programs, right? Then there are also novels being written. You know, like so many novels. I mean, like there is an intense sort of, you know, proliferation of novels, and then since there are novels, so then literature professors get busy with, you know, theory and criticism around these novels. But there is a problem with the apocalypticism that you find in contemporary forms of literature. I would say the dominant kinds of apocalypticism in literature as well as philosophy. So in philosophy, we have this whole movement known as new materialism, object-oriented ontology, and you have, you know, thinkers, very influential thinkers working in these fields, and their whole purpose is to precisely to give us conceptions of a world before humanity, world after humanity, or a humanity that is living in a world that is already ended. So we have all kinds of, approaches such as accelerationism, such as, eco-modernism is actually a celebration of the Anthropocene. Accelerationism talks about how once nature comes to an end, we would have the fully digital sphere and artificial intelligence and that, so, and you have thinkers, like very influential. If you go to Liberty Books, you will find Yuval Noah Harari, like he's a prominent author. He celebrates actually sort of the Anthropocene and the digital and the world moving towards, a zone of artificial intelligence. Now, when we talk about the indigenous peoples of the world, the end of the world and the apocalypse is not like, let's say, TV show uh, or a novel, because historically what has happened in the last, like, let's say, around 500 years or so, ever since, like there are various marked events. The arrival of Christopher Columbus in the American world actually hit the indigenous people like a catastrophe, genuinely. It's like a calamity in the encounter. And since then, they have been, proliferating genocide. So here we are talking about material stuff. The actual elimination of whole tribes and communities, and which has been ongoing. Now, so like from the indigenous standpoint, it's very important to remember, A, that the end of the world is not a fantasy, imaginal thing. It has happened for many of these communities. B, the end of the world in the indigenous communities and is a conceptual matter. And in fact, it's like a conceptual challenge for us to rethink what it means to be human, and to rethink and to raise anew the question of humanity and world. That what does it mean for humans to be central to the world? Right, because in the indigenous literatures, at least that which are now being studied, and there are a number of authors also, scholars working in this area, for the indigenous, there is no such thing as a world without humanity. Right? Because if there was anything that was anterior to the world, that was also human. And then we have the world where you have, a variety of different species, but all species also are human, right? So there is a perspectivism in indigenous thought where the various species and beings, that every being has a perspective, which is ultimately a sort of like human perspective, but it's massively differentiated. And it's differentiated, why? Because we have different bodies. It's also like a way of thinking about the world as sheer multiplicity of natures and bodies. And since you have a okay, all right, so since we are, like, after all, we are humanities people, and we are sort of bookish kind of people. So I'll just say a couple of things very quickly. In this current ongoing iteration of the philosophy in the Anthropocene course, for the first time, I took my students on a field trip to Atharki village. How many of you have heard of Atharki? Atharki, Indus Delta. It's like, I think it's really important for us to remember precisely with human sciences in the Anthropocene that, and especially here if you contextualize in Karachi and Sindh, that we are living in one of the most environmentally devastated regions in the world. And there are people not too far from us, not too far, like you drive out Atharki, it will take you 3 hours to get to that island. But it's like an actual zone of death. It's like it's a village where the population used to be 100,000 in 1980s. Now it's like down to 6,000-7,000 people, and barely struggling for life, right? So it's like, so for human sciences in the Anthropocene have to figure out a way to engage with indigeneity very, very concretely. And that I think those of us teaching courses pertaining to climate change and the Anthropocene and to ecological damage here have to keep that in mind. And I'll leave you with just a few lines from a book which definitely check it out. Please note down the name. It's called The Falling Sky, Words of a Yanomami Shaman. And this book was published by the Harvard University Press, so that I think gives it added weight, the Belknap Press at Harvard University. So it came out in 2013, and this is a book actually authored by Yanomami priest Davi Gopinava, and I'll give you just a few lines from here. That since the beginning of time, Omama has been the center of what the white people call ecology. It's true. Long before these words existed among them and they started to speak about them so much, they were already in us, though we did not name them in the same way. For the shamans, there have always been words that come from the spirits to defend the forest. If we had books like they do, the white people would see how old these words are. In the forest, we human beings are the ecology. But in let me stop here. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much.
So, thank you for that, Haris. Now, last but not least, it also said Shah Jamal would be here, who is in the natural sciences, science and engineering school, but hasn't been able to make it. So I asked my colleague, Professor Anamasi, who is in the Communication and Design program and is the director of the Graduate School Curation program. So she obviously also thinks about this question, since she's thinking about the future of our students and thinking about, in particular, those students who will be going on further into higher education. So I'm grateful to her for accepting this invitation to be on this panel. Thank you, Anam.
Thank you, Dr. Niman. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. I'm a writer, so it helps me to write things down. So I've written my thoughts. So when I joined Habib University about a year ago, people would keep talking about, as you said, it's a big focus, education in the Anthropocene, what is the role of us as educators, and I was kind of like, well, I get it, I understand it, but what are you guys talking about? But I have, over the past year, thought about it more deeply, and I have some, a few thoughts when I think about what our role is that I'd like to offer to the panel so that we can discuss them. First of all, as we've already discussed, we live in an age that is unprecedented in terms of the violence that is out there that we see, and also unprecedented in terms of the brutalization of our psyches based on our access and our viewing of this violence and the way that we are asked to consent to it, right? People say the Middle Ages were a lot more violent, and you have shows like Game of Thrones, they're like, accurate to reality. But the Middle Ages did not have, the capacity to aerially bomb civilian populations, and they did not have the capacity to, sit in a little bunker, shooting people on screen, acting like you're playing a video game, and pretending that those people are just dots on a screen, right? So I think the scope, we've already talked about it, the scope is so much more different now. And so the question becomes, what do we do, right? How do we respond? How do we decide what our students need, and what we can do in the classroom, right? So that our students don't just emerge from our universities as there's a professor called David Orr who says, we don't want them to just become better vandals of the earth and of each other. We want them to emerge as, custodians and midwives of a more just and a compassionate and a decent and an honorable world. So how do we do that, right? And I really like what Dr. Sharma said about how education is not just about the skills that you're giving to students, right? The education system has been many things over the course of its life. I mean, the first mass public schools in the United States, we know, were actually sort of a nation-building, socializing thing that were created so that you could bring people like immigrants, like the Irish Catholic, into the polity. And they were not born out of like, we will educate and expand the lives of people. They were born out of, we want to, change the cultures of these people that are coming to our lands. And then it has a functional role as well, because it's We know that it's used to create sort of pliable workers who can work in factories and offices, and they will consent to, being monitored for 8 hours of the day. And then we have theories of social and cultural capital that says, it's all the education system rewards the cultural values of the elite, right? So the education system is a lot of things. And how can we make sure that when we're teaching, we're not falling into the same habits of mind and the same structures that are reproducing all of the situations that have brought us to this place that we are here now, right? So, and then when I think about it, I think that the Anthropocene is not just something that's happening out there. It's not just happening, it's not just an event. It's also something psychological, and we talk about this at Habib University a lot. It is structures of the mind, ways of relating to other people. So, what do we have to think about when we're creating learning experience, when we're, writing learning objectives and classroom goals, right? What are we not just explicitly teaching our students, but what are we teaching them implicitly as well, right? And are we sort of reproducing the same things that have sort of been a problem? So things like competition, things like domination, things like hierarchy, authoritarianism in the classroom, right? Like I, as a teacher, am I putting myself in relation to the student of authority, domination, or am I trying to build a reciprocal relationship? Do I care about them as a human being, or am I just interested in sort of getting them in, putting some stuff in their brain and getting them out, right? And unless our students sort of learn, and we learn how to have actual relationships with each other and with the wider world, I don't think that we can do much about the crisis situation that we're at now, right? And then I think a little bit more, because as somebody who teaches creative writing, right? The whole idea of writing fiction is thoughtfulness, slowness, right? Observation. You cannot be a good writer without observation and without the very painstaking process of learning about the world, right? So for example, if my idea is to recreate a sensation and emotion, I have to spend time thinking about that first. So what does it mean if we're creating sort of education systems that are so based on small units, or that are so busy, this constant busyness, or this constant hurrying, right? Or this constant measurement. How am I supposed to have a classroom? And these are open questions, and I do not know the answers to these questions, right? So how do I, move? How do I stop thinking? How do I challenge this idea of creativity as like content creation and move it towards, actual knowledge about the world that I'm then writing in a way that communicates it adequately with other people, right? So how do I evaluate it? How do I make space for the varying paces at which students learn? And how can I expect my students to, work with each other to give each other thoughtful feedback if the main sort of the primary structure under which they operate is of competition, right? And I think related to that also. So again, what I'm trying to think about is not just what I'm teaching students, but also the ways in which I'm teaching it, and the relationships that are being built within the classroom that are contributing to these habits of mind that are also the habits of mind that have led us to this place, right? Yeah, so I think I'm going to leave it there, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about this.
Thank you so much. So I think, there's a lot more to say, but I think we're a bit pressed for time. So I'm going to take questions from, first offer you the opportunity to ask any questions or comments that you might have. And then if not, then we'll say something more. Any questions? You?
Okay. So we talked a lot about different ways in which the different faculty at Habib University has been talking about the Anthropocene. And I think one of the things that, a theme that's really important for educationists and जो लोग पढ़ाते हैं कि वो खुद कितना अपना self-critical analysis कर रहे होते हैं जब वो पढ़ा रहे होते हैं. And this is something that Anam talked about as well. So I feel like for us as faculty, it's really important to think about how we free our minds and reflect on our own complicity in these patterns and practices so that we can expand our understanding of knowledge production and also embrace the fact that there are many ways of knowing. And we can also design systems that shift power to those we serve. So for us, it's talking about not only the communities we work in as practitioners, but it's also about the students we teach. And so how do we do that in the classroom? I mean, we do that by practice, by our own practical application of those ideas. We do it by pushing them to think critically and reflexively, which means going back to their own practices and how they are looking at the world, the lens through which they're looking at the world. We talk about ways of disrupting the spaces which they're in. It doesn't have to be violent disruption. It can just be the way you think, the way you write, the way you engage. It can be through language. It can be tools that you give them to allow them to analyze things differently. It can be through rethinking a collective imagination, like how can we look at the world differently, one that is ethical, one that is engaged in talking about like changing power structures. And it can be, those are all acts of resistance. Even designing a course on the Anthropocene for us is an act of resistance. So I'll hand over.
Gigi.
Well, my name is Saeed Ali Khan. Basically, I'm a chartered accountant. My question is that in Pakistan, particularly with reference to our country, the ethical values are deteriorating a lot. And our institutes and our educational caretakers, they are providing to us. There's a need that we should increase the ethical values and how they are doing. My question is that what they are doing in this regard and what is their planning about this so that the nation can be changed. We can see that there's a lot of room and space for that in particular Pakistan. Thank you.
So thank you for that question. Of course, the question of ethics is absolutely central to the question of the Anthropocene. Because obviously we arrived in this situation because of deprioritizing ethical life. Yeah? We know that what actually makes communities happy, or human beings happy, is community. The largest social science, longest social science study that's ever been conducted over the course of many, many decades. And, you know, things that were obvious to humanity for millennia on end, now you have to do research to find out. For instance, they found out after conducting this study over decades that what actually makes people happy, human beings happy in the end, is community. That is their relations with other people, which is of course what ethics is. So you're absolutely right to point out the importance of this, and the Anthropocene has just pushed this question into the forefront. So we invented this form of life which is unprecedentedly unethical because it's entirely based on aspirations that are not ethical, that nobody, I mean, it's not, we're not, the aspiration is no longer as it was for societies for millennia, that human beings should like become like, for instance, in takhalluqu bi akhlaq Allah in Islam, yeah, cultivate, the Prophet said, cultivate the ethos of divinity, the ethics of divinity. We should try to be like God, which means being ethical. That's what God is supposed to be. Yeah. Similarly, in Plato, in Christianity. So yes, you're absolutely right that this is so. That's part of what is involved. This is what my colleagues have been saying, is to re-centralize ethical questions in the study of the human and social sciences. Yeah. So that's what the conversation is about, as you can see. So this is what Professor Shamadosa was emphasizing. This is what Haris was emphasizing, this is what Anam was emphasizing. So you're absolutely right, and that's a central part of our curriculum and curricular goals. Jeet Tanveer Sahiba.
Yeah. So Habib University has presented a different kind of model of education to some extent, but I would like you to comment on, what impact has it had? Is there any impact in the students and, the ones who have gone for studies abroad and have come back from there? Maybe you can you tell us a little about that?
You want to say something about this? You want to say something? I will say something about it for sure. I think it's had a huge impact. Our students are very dramatically different as cohorts from the graduates of other institutions in their entire orientation. मतलब एक तो संजीदगी उनमें ज़्यादा है. आपको इतने सारे संजीदा लोग कोहॉर्ट में नहीं मिलेंगे. मैं ज़ाहिर है ये तो नहीं कहा जा सकता कि सबके सब जो हैं अफलातून हैं, मगर बहरहाल उनके मिजाज में एक संजीदगी है और अपने आप पर तनकीद करने की तौफीक है किसी हद तक, और वो इसी तालीम की वजह से. और ये भी कि ये बहुत सारे लोग जो हैं वो, हम ज़्यादातर पढ़े लिखे लोग जो हैं वो समझते हैं कि ये जदीद दौर जो है वो इंसान की तारीख़ का बेहतरीन दौर है और वो ख़ुद इंसान की तारीख़ के बेहतरीन लोग हैं. इससे ज़्यादा ख़तरनाक इंसान कोई नहीं हो सकता जो अपने आप को ये समझे कि मैं इंसान की तारीख़ का बेहतरीन दौर में रह रहा हूँ और मैं ख़ुद भी इंसानियत की बेहतरीन मिसाल हूँ, जबकि सूरत हाल उसके बिल्कुल बरअक्स हो. जो उसकी हकीकत है कि हम वो लोग हैं जिन्होंने कुर्राए अर्ज़ को, पूरी इंसानियत को, बाकी तमाम मखलूक़ात को जिस रफ्तार से मखलूक़ात ख़त्म हो रही है दुनिया में, हम लोगों को यहाँ पे बैठ के थाड़े मार मार के रोना चाहिए और मातम करना चाहिए कि हम जो हमारा तर्ज़ ज़िंदगी है उससे कितनी मखलूक़ात खुदा की बनाई हुई ख़त्म हो रही हैं. और तो इस लिहाज से मेरे ख्याल में इन तमाम चीज़ों का शऊर हबीब यूनिवर्सिटी, क्योंकि उनको पहले ही साल से ये शुरू कर देते हैं हम सिलसिला, तो वो अगर पढ़ाई से बचना भी चाहें तो वो माहौल ऐसा है कि वो इन तमाम चीज़ों पर गौर करने पर मजबूर हैं. चुनाचे कम या ज़्यादा सब के सब में शऊर जो है कुछ ज़्यादा है. अब वो मुख्तलिफ़ किस्म के तमाम मुख्तलिफ, मगर वो इखलाकी फ़ैसले भी करते हैं. अगर उनको ऐसा लगता है कि ये इदारा जो मेरे इखलाकी आदर्श हैं वो उससे कोई उसमें मुमासलत नहीं है, तो वो फिर वो नौकरियां भी नहीं करते. ये मुझे पर्सनली मालूम है कि बहुत सारे स्टूडेंट्स इस तरह के फ़ैसले भी करते हैं, मगर जहाँ भी वो जाते हैं उनका मिजाज अलग होता है, चुनाचे उसका भी असर अलग होता है. मुझे इस बात पर काफ़ी, और जो ग्रेजुएट स्कूल भी जा रहे हैं वो नए नए किस्म के काम कर रहे हैं, मतलब नई नई किस्म की तहकीकात जिसका इन तमाम बातों से ताल्लुक़ है जो ये हारिस और शमा और अनम कर रहे हैं.
उसमें अच्छा क्या टाइम होगा कि एक सवाल और? जी प्लीज़ आप पूछिए. आप अपना नाम भी बताइएगा ज़रूर.
My name is Sayyida Zainab Usman, and I am a student of Bahria University. Sir,
Which university?
Bahria University.
Bahria University.
So you talked about elimination of indigenous. So I wanted
Yes.
to know, in your opinion, how can we protect them or save them?
How can we protect them? That's a very deep, very important question. I think the easiest response is to stop killing them. You know, that's that's one thing, because like for instance, we are sitting here in the province of Sindh. Like, do you know that in Sindh there is a whole area, I mean, like, you know, all of Sindh has indigeneity, you know, mapped all over it, but there is an area, in fact, the professor who's sitting in front of you, he's a historian, he comes from that area, it's known as the Kacha. So the Kacha in northern Sindh. So the people who live in the Kacha have been criminalized by the state. They've been labeled as criminals. And you know, and especially since the 1980s, that label of them being criminal, you've heard the term Dhadiyal maybe, that everyone who lives in the Kacha is Dhadiyal, right? So there is a criminalization of the whole, and that area is very, very rich in the things that we recognize as culture. Religion, belief, practice, and then also embodied practice and ways of living with and being with nature. You know, so that's the first thing. I mean, like here, if the question is said in the Pakistani context that, well, I think our state has to move towards a culture of life and not a culture of death. You know, like anything that differs from the central ideology of the state doesn't have to be killed. You know, like let it live kind of thing. So that's like the other thing is that the indigenous communities do survive in various, and there are models. And like, let's say in the country of Chile, now they're in the parliament. They don't want to become parliamentarians, but they've been given a place, a space in the parliament. But like, why don't they want to become parliamentarians? Because they are deliberately non-modern. You know, that's a stance that they've taken, and it's a well thought out stance. So there are other models, you know, in Colombia is another country where you have very exemplary ways of dealing. So I hope I answered this question. Thank you for a really wonderful question.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
very much.
Thank you to the audience, and thank you to my colleagues for these very insightful presentations. Khuda Hafiz.